Okay, welcome Twitch and YouTube. So I'm going to go ahead and do a run in Path of Exile, doing what I would refer to as a hollow palm build, or a hollow palm technique build. So this is a not the same as Facebreaker, but it's another basically unarmed build. So this is sort of a series that I'll refer to as POE new builds, because I am not that good at making builds, but I can make builds that I generally think I can take to endgame mapping. So this is basically sort of the prospective of what the build's going to look like going forward. This is basically sort of what I'm thinking the build might look like around 80, obviously with no gear, which is why the resists are really bad. Right, there's no resist on this character because I haven't found any of the gear yet. Right, so unlike the previous build, well, maybe like the previous build, for a lot of the leveling, I'll be just sort of whatever random uniques and random stuff I find. But when I get to endgame, hopefully by then I'll have found some gear that is not just random uniques. There'll be a couple uniques involved, and that's actually what I'll talk about right now. Um, so obviously in a Hollow Palm build, you need a way to get Hollow Palm. It's not by default on your passive tree. There's three ways that I know of to get it. The one I will be using for this build is the one with nothing, small cluster jewel. Uh, the cluster jewel works like any other small cluster jewel, but when you allocate it, you get Hollow Palm technique, which applies the following benefits. You count as dual wielding when you're unencumbered, 40% more attack speed with melee skills when you're unencumbered, and adds 14 to 20 attack physical damage to melee skills per 10 dexterity when you're unencumbered. And unencumbered is a situation where your inventory has nothing in weapon slots 1, 2, or gloves. So you can't combo those Facebreaker. In fact, this would be incredibly broken with Facebreaker if you could combo it, because this is going to basically fix the flat damage problem I was having with Facebreaker, where Facebreaker had a massive multiplier, but didn't really have any flat damage because your base unarmed attacks don't have any flat damage. This is going to be the other way around, where we're going to have lots and lots and lots of flat damage if we can stack dexterity to the moon and back. On the other hand, there isn't actually going to be very much flat percentile, or there isn't going to be very much percentile damage. So we're both going to have to really stack dexterity to get a bunch of flat, and even very minor multipliers are going to be pretty effective as far as damage. Now, there's a couple different uniques you can use with this build, in addition to the one with nothing, to give you the hollow palm. I, for example, have a brisk wrap. It might not be as good as this one. This is just one I sort of summoned from the void using POB. Brisk wrap, you might notice, has 15% increased dexterity. So whatever other dexterity you get in the build, this will multiply it by 15% more. It also nicely has 1% increased damage per 15 dexterity. So this is part of where our percentile damage is going to come from in the final build between picking up a brisk wrap and having the one with nothing. There's a couple other items you can get, like you could get Gargan's Flight, which I don't have. You could potentially trade for. Again, another source of something scaling off dexterity. In this case, it's max life per dexterity. Or Will of Gift. I actually have a Will of Gift. I'm not sure if I'm going to incorporate it in the final build, but we might incorporate it in the final build. And then basically what you're going to be looking for in items is the stuff to get your resists sorted, and then dexterity. Dexterity everywhere, lots of dexterity. And then obviously we're probably going to run some sort of flasks. Far as the base character, this is obviously going to be a dex stacking build, so you probably want something in the bottom left, or the bottom right side of the tree. As far as your starting character, I'm going to go with the character that has the highest base starting dex. Depending upon what you want to do, maybe you might want to go instead with the bottom of the tree instead of the bottom right of the tree. Or maybe you've got some interesting build where you reuse it from the middle as well. Right? So basically it's going to be a dex stacking build. This is what I'm thinking the build might roughly look like. I'll zoom in some parts so you can see. So this is the Pathfinder is probably what I'm thinking of going with to get a lot of flask effects. We're down in the bottom right of the tree, so we can pick up spell dodge or dodge, spell dodge. Right now the build has a lot of health in it. It probably doesn't need that much health because this health is being built around the presumption that I might not be able to find health on armor and dex, flat dex on armor. I might get lucky with the RNG, and that might not need to be a case. This is an example of you can do a lot more with the cluster jewels out here. Sort of poking around at the potential of the cluster jewels. These aren't necessarily any special, right? So these are basically, if we reroll them until we get dex on them. Well, on this one, get dex on this one. How much dex you can get. And on this one, if you can get life, because you need some life. As an unarmed build, you have a limitation on what skills you can use. In the dex corner, there's 2 dex skills. So I suppose you could still, if you built more strength into the build, you could still run something like like we were running with Facebreakers, where you do ground slam, which is a strength gem. But if you're going dex gems, there's sort of 2 real contenders for gem to pick from. You do Frenzy of Onslaught, which is a fairly good single target attack, or you can do Cyclone, which is basically you spin like a top through the enemies. Frenzy of Onslaught has a minimum level for the gem of 16, and Cyclone has a minimum level of 32. So if you want to try running pure dex gems for your attacking, you obviously don't get both of them. I don't get access to both until 32, and you don't even get access to Frenzy until 16. So this is not a build where you can necessarily swap straight into Hollow Palm technique from level 1. So as I'm playing through Act 1, I'm basically going to be playing a build that will run without having to build the proper tree for it. Thinking I'm probably going to run like Caustic Arrow. So I have a thing that doesn't necessarily need anything from the tree to scale for the first act or 2. In theory, you could swap, as this tree is, right? You could swap as early as, I think, 17. Yeah, it's expecting 17. So you could, in theory, swap as early as 17 to Hollow Palm. I would probably not recommend going that early. Because at that point, unless you're running something like Ground Slam using Strength, just leave you the Frenzy of Onslaught. I don't think anyone, well, I wouldn't. Maybe you do, but I don't think many people would want to run through a couple acts of Path of Exile with only a single target skill. I think people would like some AoE, and that's sort of where Cyclone comes in this build. Instead, you're probably going to do a realistic swap like I'm going to do, which is I'm going to try running up to 32 before making the swap over to Hollow Palm, and then that allows me to use Frenzy and Cyclone both. So I can use Frenzy when there's one like rare up to take the rare down, because Frenzy's got a bigger single target damage output, and then use Cyclone to clear mobs, clear packs of mobs. Another thing to note is right now it's giving me a warning here, like, hey, this build isn't meeting the strength requirement. In this case, this is a strength requirement for Cyclone. Cyclone is I think it's technically a hybrid gem, where it's a dex strength gem. Presumably we'll have some strength from various items in the build. For example, I know I'm going to be running the amulet we were running last build that I showed off, at least temporarily, the Tears of Purity from reserves. And that has like all stats on it. It has a small amount of small stats on it. So the fact that the build right now is 4 strength short, just looking at POB, is just because I don't have that amulet in the POB. And we go back to the final build. The final build state, like, it's showing 514 dex here. That's because right now in items, we've got no items set up, right? So if we say, okay, let's do best with no uniques, and then I actually know I have the brisk wrap. So let's say we have brisk wrap on. Right now we're looking at something more like 800 dex, and that's At this point, that's starting to be quite a reasonable amount of damage, right? So that's 17 something thousand damage on the single target, or 5,000 damage spread across anything you can spin through. And then obviously I still have other uniques I can toss on, right? So I can toss on, I do have a Will-O-Wisp, so I can toss the Will-O-Wisp on for more dexterity and such, right? And then these aren't even necessarily all that special as far as dex is concerned. This is just assuming the build is able to find an average dex item for every slot, or on average is able to find the average dex item for every slot. So there could be scenarios where like, okay, this one's not 30, but you got a 60 here. And if we actually go find POB, use POB to tell us how these work, right? So 30 is average, but yeah, you can get up to 55 on these, right? So you can maybe have a scenario where, okay, you have one that's like the tier 1 version of it. And then the other one instead has more resists, right? So there's definitely ways to build it. I'm not going to assume that these are all necessarily going to have great decks on them, but I am sort of assuming presumption that they'll have reasonable decks on them. And because it doesn't update the level for it, let's go ahead and raise the gem level to show you what level 20 gems look like from a damage standpoint. So I have these both shown in full DPS. Obviously, you're only using one of them at a time, but you can see you're getting just short of 40,000 damage on the single target, something like 16,000 on the Cyclone. And at level 80, this is hit points with no hit points in the items, right? So none of the items here have any hit points, which means this is probably going to even have more hit points. In fact, you can probably pull more hit points back out of the build, and I may pull more hit points back out of the build as I get hit points on items and stuff. And again, this is you're probably going to pick items that actually get your resistances capped. This set, it's not getting your resistance capped, but I'm also not presuming where they will be in the items. I'm just presuming that if I've only got, hey, I want dex on this item, I want dex on this item, I want the dex on this item, right? That RNG may grant me some fire resist here, some cold resist there, some lightning resist here. And I think there's enough empty slots on these items, right, that I can reasonably get to resist cap. So that's basically the next build I'm going to show off in Path of Exile is trying to run a Hull Plumb build, which from a damage standpoint is basically a dex stacker. Just with the interesting effect that you have to obviously run the run with no weapons, no shields, no quivers, no gloves, right? And depending on how you build the tree, you can get to spell dodge cap, you can get to block cap. Obviously, the build how I have it set up right now is not block capped, and it has enough spell suppression that acrobatics here is technically making it that you have more than 50% spell dodge. Technically, spell suppression caps at 100% before you take acrobatics, and then maximum chance to dodge being 75 means it would max out at what would have been 150% spell suppression. So maybe you could back off somewhere in here if you didn't actually want dodge instead of want just pure suppression to save some more points that way as well. And there's definitely other things you can do in this tree that might be interesting for your build. I don't necessarily know offhand a way to get critical strike chance unarmed, but if you found some critical strike chance unarmed, for example, you can go in here and grab more critical strike chance for your dual wielding, because your this build will be dual wielding technically. You could do life vamp for hitting things. Lots of other things you can change in here just besides running around the tree. And maybe you wouldn't run around the tree as much, right? So if you don't need the health, maybe you don't run down here. Instead, you pick up this note or something. And that's actually something I'm going to be testing as I level this, because this will be the first time I'll level this. But this doesn't look like it'll be too hard to level. And the damage to some degree is actually a lot more self-explanatory than it was on the Facebreaker build. And I suppose bringing the facebreaker build up, I could actually quickly bring the facebreaker build up. This is the facebreaker build. Yeah, I think this is the facebreaker build. Oh, that's the old version of it. It's the feature plan. Yeah, the feature plan's vaguely where it went. So you can see the facebreaker build is only, ground slam's only doing 18,000, right? Let me just, I can check the import. Right. So yeah, just short of 30,000 on the facebreaker build. And to be fair, that's 30,000 AoE, right? 40,000 with the impale. Oh, actually, that's the Val ground slam. Let's see, can I bring up the regular one quickly? Middle ground slam. Oh, that one. There we go. Yeah, so you can see the ground slam is still only sitting around like 20,000 AoE. Whereas we go back to the Hollow Palm. The Hollow Palm is doing 20,000 single target. Well, it's doing almost 40,000 single target. And it's doing about 20,000 AoE spinning through things, right? So I think this build should be reasonably playable. So I'm going to go ahead and actually level one of these up and see how well it goes. And while I'm on the trade league, I didn't actually farm up. Well, I didn't buy any of the items that I'm going to be using this build. I actually just dropped them playing the popcorn build and the facebreaker build. Right, so these are obviously either I have streamer luck, which I don't think is the case because I think I pulled them both on the SRS build before I started streaming, or they're common enough that these are things that you can reasonably farm for yourself. And if they're reasonably common that you can farm for yourself, they're probably reasonably cheap on the trade league. Okay, so that is functionally the prospective of the build I'm going to run today. I'm not going to run it all the way to level 80 today, but I'm thinking I should at least really get through Act 1 today. So this is where I'm going to go ahead and put the cut for YouTube. So this sort of prospective episode 0 will be the first part up on YouTube. After which I'll show how Act 1 goes. That'll be the following day's video for YouTube. Right now, the thought process I'm thinking for actually leveling it, because obviously, going off of what I said earlier, the earliest you can swap over to Hollow Palm is like 17. I'm not going to stop at 17. I'm going to go to 32. So I can have both Cyclone and Frenzy of Onslaught for leveling. What I think I'm going to do is I think I'm going to do a Cost Arrow build with Quill Rain until I get there. So, yeah, so it's not necessarily going to be a very special first couple episodes, but you're going to see sort of how I speed level through some of the earlier content with a fairly powerful skill. And anyways, that might have been what would have been better to do with the Facebreaker build, as I didn't have a lot of flat damage earlier on. So hopefully doing it this way will make the video a little more interesting. But this is where the video cut's going to go in. If you're watching this on YouTube, catch you tomorrow. If you're watching on Twitch, it's going to take me like a couple seconds to get the character loaded in. I'll start talking again when we get in.